Hey, this is Doug Field, along with my co-host, Amy Otto, and welcome back to this segment of Healthcare Consumerism Radio. Amy, let's pick up the discussion around small businesses and the ACA and talk a little bit about, wellness and prevention and incentives and the whole premium differential.
Sure. Well, when you think about where we are today, 21% of Americans still smoke, which for me, that kind of surprises me. Maybe it's because I don't hang around with a lot of smokers, but the statistics on obesity and everything are just alarming. And really, they say that 20% of the population is driving 80% of those claims.
Wow.
So it's really because of lifestyle choices and, what we put in our body and how often we move our body. So, with 133 million individuals living with chronic disease like we just talked about, we need to stop, the cycle before it gets to that place.
And it's going to get worse with all we baby boomers. I'm including myself, no one else. We baby boomers moving, into kind of the point we're going to need more care if we're not, careful, taking care of ourselves.
Yes, and you bring up a great point, too. With over 69% of Americans being overweight, according to the CDC, that's one issue. But then you also think about the aging workforce and their health and wellness. People are having to work longer, so they're on those benefits longer. And that the lifestyle choices and the obesity, think about the disease states, heart disease, strokes, type 2 diabetes, depression, certain types of cancer. Those are all high claims, and they're driven by lifestyle choices. So I think laying a foundation and groundwork for wellness in a company is key. And the Affordable Care Act.
And that's even for small companies, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. The Affordable Care Act now, as of 2014, allows for a 30% premium differential for those that choose not to participate in a qualified wellness program. So, like I talked about earlier, that good driver's discount, employers can pass that on. And 50% premium differential for those that still smoke if they offer a tobacco cessation.
That's not a small number at all.
No, and that's 50% of the overall COBRA rate. That's just not the employee's portion. So you can really hammer an individual. I don't think that it's a good idea to do that off the bat, but as a strategy, to kind of start offering those differentials, it's important, definitely.
Very interesting. And I think we're going to continue this discussion around the ACA and small businesses with our current guest joining us from New York, Steve Friedman with Littler Mendelson. Hey, Steve.
Hi, how are you?
I'm fine. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Steve, I'm here with Amy Otto, who's a guest host here, and she's a leading benefit consultant with Brown & Brown down here, and Jonathan Field is here. I'm my managing editor, and give our audience, you're a repeat guest, and it's glad to have you back again, but kind of refresh our audiences with, Littler Mendelson and your unique position in the space and helping work with small businesses in the ACA.
Sure. Littler Mendelson is the country's largest firm, sort of a boutique law firm. We specialize just in labor, employment, and benefits. And we have many, many attorneys who are focusing, if not exclusively, a large part of their practice on ACA compliance and helping our clients navigate around this very, very interesting and complicated set of rules.
Steve, define for us kind of small businesses. People define it a little different. What do you define as a small business?
Well, generally under 20 million in sales. We actually did some polling about how small businesses were reviewing the ACA, and I think that's what we used as our yardstick. And frankly, when we did our polling with small businesses, it showed that there was an awful lot of fear out there about the ACA.
What are some of the top concerns that you went through your poll that you, for small businesses, what are they most concerned about with the ACA?
I think the biggest concern, frankly, is cost.
Mm-hmm.
And how much health care is going to be costing them in the future compared to where it is now. As we know, the cost of health care has been escalating rapidly for all businesses for some time. But the ACA creates additional problems for small businesses. For one thing, there's a fear that the costs that have been high are even going to go higher, and that the cost increases could be higher percentages than what we've seen in the past. And then secondly, there's the notion of the employer mandate, which frankly creates this idea that businesses have to cover full-time employees. It's a mandate that's never existed before, and that's going to create a lot of hurdles for small businesses, basically imposing costs that they never had.
Can you talk a little bit about the hours? I guess full-time employment is now 30 hours. If somebody has a lot of part-time employees, how do those part-time employees add up to equal full-time employees for the statistical analysis?
Sure. These rules don't apply to all businesses, and it's important to make that clear. In 2015, these rules will apply to businesses with over 100 full-time employees, or what we call full-time employee equivalents, and then that number goes down to 50 in 2016 and in later years. But and so the question is, how do you know whether you have this threshold 100 or 50 full-time employees? Well, what you do is you first look at those folks who are working over 30 hours, whether or not you include them as full-time on your ledger, they're going to be called full-time employees for purposes of the Affordable Care Act. So you take those employees, put them on one side of the ledger, and then you look at all of your part-timers, and you count up their monthly hours and divide those hours by 120, and that will give you a number of what we call full-time equivalents. You add the full-timers to the full-time equivalents and see if you breach the 100 or 50 employee mark. And if you do, then you're subject to this employer mandate beginning in 2015.
Steve, we have a job problem in this country, and I think it's going to get worse instead of better, some of it because of the ACA. Because if I'm a small business, if I'm a startup, if I'm a new business, it causes me to look at my business a different way and growing it, does it not?
Absolutely. When we did our polling, we found that significant numbers of small businesses were either taking their hiring and putting hiring plans on hold, or making sure that the people that they hired weren't full-time employees but part-time employees. This isn't exactly a pro-growth approach, and it sort of flies in the face of what one would want small business to be seeking to do. And so I think there is a very big concern about whether the sort of what we call unintended consequences of the ACA may have a negative impact on the way small businesses grow and on how employers think about their costs and about their employees and how they're going to be going about doing business.
Yeah, because we've got there's a lot of criticism sometimes that comes out of Washington about the prevalence of part-time workers across the country, but you just talked about that being the ACA being a big multiplier of part-time people.
That's, and keep in mind that we were talking about taking these part-timers and dividing their hours by 120 to get part-time equivalents. Right. However, keep in mind that you only include those part-timers to determine if your business must qualify or must satisfy the employer mandate under the ACA. But if you do have to satisfy the employer mandate, then the only people you must cover are your full-time employees, those who are working over 30 hours a week. So you don't have to cover anybody who's working under that hourly threshold.
Do you see any of this changing? We had I attended a conference out in Colorado, and Gibbs spoke at that conference, and one of the key things that he said almost immediately in his presentation, that one of the things he felt was going to be a compromise that was going to happen relatively quickly is the employer mandate go away. And the whole audience was kind of stunned and said, what? What did he just say?
That got a reaction, right?
Yeah. I mean, what do you think? I don't know whether you've heard that too, Steve. I mean, what do you...
you hear about a lot of things with this law.
Yeah, you do.
It's
because there's a lot of pages with this law, Steve.
Right. No, there's a lot of pages, and there's a lot of speculation as to what may or may not be going away. Here's the way I basically look at this. This is the centerpiece of Obama's domestic policy agenda, and I think it's fair to say that that's the case for not only the first term but also this term. This is up front and center, and we can certainly see some tinkering that is possible and even probable. And such tinkering might be, will that 30-hour-a-week threshold be pushed up a little bit to give businesses some relief so that they don't have to include everybody who's a 30-hour person as a full-timer. And so we're hoping, for our clients' sake, that perhaps that moves up to 40 hours a week, which would be more realistic. But to think that there's going to be a wholesale disposition of the employer mandate or one of the other big pieces of this legislation, I think that's not going to happen unless and until we see a big calamity occurring in connection with one of these big pieces of the legislation. So, if we saw in a couple of years that employers were getting crushed by this, and that that it was actually affecting American business, at that time I think perhaps it would be appropriate to think about whether there may be something that would be happening with the employer mandate. But until that time, I just don't see it. I see a lot of tinkering going on, and we just have too much gridlock and too much of a stalemated structure in D.C. to see a lot of give on either side without it really being forced.
Yeah, I think you're right. Steve, we've got about a minute to go, and I want to give you a chance to leave our audience with one or two takeaways.
Well, what every employer should be doing is really focusing on what strategies you're adopting for next year. Some employers are going to be paying the $2,000 penalty tax and letting their employees go to the exchange. Other employers are just going to be doing what they're doing and covering everyone, in accordance with the rules. But a lot of employers are also taking proactive steps to think about whether they should be restructuring their workforce, how to best deal with these rules. My advice would be sit down with someone who can advise you what your options are, what position you'll be in with respect to whether or not you're going to be paying penalty taxes. Really do a strategic overview of how you should be approaching the ACA. Just don't let it hit you in the face in 2015.
Okay. Steve, listen, we really, really appreciate you joining us. You have a great weekend, and we'll have you on again sometime in the near term.
My pleasure.
Thanks, Steve. To our audience, stay tuned for the next segment of Healthcare Consumerism Radio.